And hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. And I want to just give my own personal warm welcome to our two wonderful guests, Janelle Burke and Chief Dan Templeman. I'm really looking forward to our conversation this evening. So I want to start with you, Janelle, and I want to go back to about 4 years ago in 2017. Your daughter, she was 14 years old at the time, she had a pretty disturbing, frightening experience with a few officers from the Everett City Police Department. And I'd like for you to just go back and tell us what happened.
Okay, so this is a common thing, a common conversation we have, up here. And what ended up happening that particular day, I got a phone call from a cop that said, "We have your daughter. She matches the description of a runaway. You need to come pick her up." And so I felt like, okay, if she's doing something and she's matching the description of a runaway, she can wait. It's not that, it's not that big of a deal where I have to go rush. But I was on my way out the door and I heard on the phone that he was making comments that were derogatory about the way she was looking, calling her, whores and things like that. So then I rushed out the house with the mentality of, it's not going to end well for anybody once I get up there. And when I got to the scene, I kind of, she had, she was bloodied a little bit. She had like blood on her hairline. I didn't understand what was happening, but I realized at that time it was above and beyond anything I could do about the situation. I took her statement when she got home, and it really made no sense. It was a whole situation of girls fighting. She was trying to break it up and she got caught up in the ruckus because she couldn't hear. One cop gave her directive to put her hands up. The other cop told her to stay still and don't move. And so I think what happened was, from what she stated and from what, other witnesses stated that were there, was that she triggered the cop by saying, "I'm going to stand right here and I'm not going to move because you're not going to shoot me and kill me the way you do the other Black kids." And it triggered the cop to have a response to then grab her by her hair and pull her down to the ground and drag her across the ground. They got on top of her. And they did almost, one cop admitted that he had his knee, I guess, in her neck area. But with her being 100 pounds soaking wet, and it was 3 to 4 cops, one was on her back, the other one was on her legs. And basically they were it was a prone asphyxiation occurring, but I don't think they realized that in that moment. And only thing that got me that night was she described to me that her body was lifting off the ground and she felt like she was floating. And me being me, I went in being that mom and, couldn't get answers, couldn't get a police report. They wouldn't give me details because she was a minor. So I reached out to the chief of police and was like, something has to give because I'm not getting cooperation.
And so when you reached out, or I guess even before you reached out, what were you hoping? What kind of response were you hoping from Chief Templeman?
I don't even know what I was expecting as a response. And I didn't know if I really wanted a response. In that moment, I was so irate and so, I was so upset that I didn't care what they had to say. I wasn't going to go in to listen. I was really upset, and I'm a journalist. So my thing was, I'm going to put this everywhere. I'm going to get the recordings. I'm going, do everything in my power to just basically make their life a living hell. That's what my mentality was in that moment. Mm-hmm. But when I reached out to him, my daughter, she didn't want that. She wanted something different. She didn't want me to, be myself. Because at that moment, I was a firecracker, especially when it came to my children. And I'm a mother of 7 kids. So when it comes to my children, I'm just, I'm mama bear. I don't know how to be anything but she didn't want that. She wanted me to talk to them and she wanted to talk to them. So her talking to me first made me go into the situation a lot more calmer with a different outlook. And I still wanted to stick it to him, but she was like, "No, you're going to talk." Mm-hmm. So, I really wanted at that time when she said she wants to talk, all I wanted was her to be heard. I didn't, any expectations that I had went out the window in that moment. Mm-hmm. It was about her.
So Chief Dan, when you first got that call from Janelle, and she's telling you this horrific experience that her 14-year-old daughter had just had, what were you thinking? What was going on with you? What was your response to that?
Well, thank you, Angie. Thanks, Janelle. And welcome again, everybody, to the forum this evening. I'm glad to be here. So I'll just start. I was familiar with Janelle already because we'd had some brief interactions previously related to some other, grassroots activity and work that she was doing in the city. So Janelle wasn't a complete stranger to me, but it wouldn't have mattered if she was. But Janelle describes herself as a firecracker a little bit. I would say passionate, and so obviously, I really make an effort as police chief to engage our community and have these conversations with community members that have had negative experiences with law enforcement. And so that was the first thing, right? Was to listen to what she had to say. And I can be honest, when somebody is as passionate as Janelle is sharing, the experience that her daughter had and how it made her daughter feel and how it made Janelle feel, it's easy I think, to become defensive, right? And but it was really important for me to not do that, for me to actually listen through everything to what she and what her daughter were sharing. And so that's kind of how that conversation started, right? It was via phone, I believe, initially. But then, we felt that it was important for that to move on to a face-to-face conversation, because I just think that when people sit down in a room together, generally, not always, but generally, there's a better outcome and a better understanding from both sides. So that's how it started for me, and that was kind of my initial reaction when I first heard from Janelle regarding this incident.
And so how was it when you guys had your first one-on-one? I mean, this incident happened. Janelle's a fierce, passionate mother. She's very angry, very protective, very, very upset about what happened to her daughter. And you guys were both in the same room together, face to face. What did that look like? Janelle, why don't you start talking about that? What was that like, that first initial conversation with Chief Dan?
I think we both came in kind of defensive because we both had only our sides of the story, and I was missing a lot of details, and he actually helped fill a lot of those details in for me. So then my guard was let down a little bit by bit, that he actually was honest and transparent when he didn't have to be. And, so we kind of like, my guard came down and I was able to listen to him a little bit more and understand where he was coming from as a, police chief. Cause I'm thinking to myself, okay, we both have kids in this situation. He's the father. Those are his children. I'm the mother. She was my child. So we both had a level of responsibility for both, for our children, but at the same time had to find a way to make it a situation where we can, and we always, I don't know how it always came to be, but we always tried to meet in the middle. So whether we were going to come out and agree with it altogether or not, even in that first meeting, we came out of it literally in a sense of calm, or at least I had a sense of calm coming out of the meeting. And, feeding off my daughter's energy, it seemed that it was still, she felt confident in that he was going to do whatever he could. And, and it kind of just started the ball rolling.
Mm-hmm. So you felt like you got your questions filled, like you weren't clear about what happened. And so it seems like Chief Dan was able to kind of fill you in as to what actually took place.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he filled it in what took place, but it also, like, even though I knew that I was never going to get the answers I wanted and we weren't going to ever have full closure, it helped me still be able to move on and be okay with the fact that I knew that he was trying. Yeah.
So I just want to ask Chief Dan, the officers that were involved with Janelle's daughter, what happened in that situation? Were they ever brought into the dialogue with Janelle? Was there any disciplinary action that they experienced? What happened after that incident?
Yeah, so we conducted obviously a review of that whole incident, right? And that review really entails the supervisors and the chain, what we call the chain of command. So the supervisors reviewing the incident, talking with the officers, reviewing the reports, looking at the witness statements, and really taking the opportunity, obviously, to address if we have any policy violations, to address policy violations. And sometimes what happens is that even if we aren't able to articulate or substantiate a policy violation, the question then becomes, from my perspective, is could we have done things differently? You know, could we have had a different interaction with whether it's with Janelle's daughter or any other community member, right? That we learn of where the contact has left a negative impression on somebody. So we'll always look at that, right? And so in this case, we did exactly that, right? And we go through it. And to Janelle's point, you know, yes, there's information obviously that she wasn't made aware of the night of the incident, because sometimes the night of the incident, in the heat of the moment, you know, with the officers, you know, who are there and all the participants that are there and a lot of emotion and a lot of things happening, you're not always going to get the best information. And so, you know, I guess I would say I had the luxury of time a little bit to be able to read all the reports, to read all the witness statements, to, you know, hear from the supervisors who had spoken with the officers. So, you know, that's the process that we go through in those situations, and really look to, you know, in the end, you know, hold ourselves accountable and then improve on our service delivery, because I'm always the first one to say, and I know I've said this to Janelle and I've said it to other community members, you know, we're not perfect, you know, in law enforcement, and we do sometimes make mistakes, and we do sometimes have areas where we can improve. And I think that we always have to be willing to be introspective and looking at those areas.
So how much dialoguing have you guys done? I mean, we had the situation that happened with Janelle's daughter, and she came to you initially, you had this sit down meeting. Has that continued on? Have you guys continued this relationship building between two of you, Janelle?
Until COVID, I mean, we were, you know, I would go in, I would, you know, email and say, we have a situation here at the high school, or we have this group of kids that we're having a situation, or this happened. And even if we didn't meet in person, he would get back to me, you know, over the phone or via email. And if we did do email, he would still follow up with a phone call to make sure everything worked out. Or if he couldn't deal with it, he would assign somebody to deal with it and get back to me. So there's always it was always a constant back and forth and dialogue. And even during COVID, I had a couple times where I had to say, hey, I heard this, is this true? Because, you know, being a journalist, I was like, I stopped writing, but I was still getting an inflood of like information that was, you know, with the George Floyd situation happening, it was important for the community as far as community safety. So I would hear things and say, did you hear about this? Is this true? Is this something we have to worry about? You know, and, you know, he would just be like, well, if it was, you know, the one time I reached out, I was like, no, I didn't hear about this, you know, so it wasn't really we haven't been able to like meet in person, so to speak. And I really haven't reached out to meet in person since the COVID things, you know, COVID started. But overall, every time I have reached out to him with a question or curiosity or concern, he has got back to me.
Yeah, so it's a real, it seems to me, Chief Dan, a real open door policy that you created, so people like Janelle can come to you and talk to you about things that are of concern to them, issues that are affecting their community.
Yeah, Angie, I think it's critically important for those of us that are in law enforcement today, and those of us that lead organizations, to be accessible to our community members. And that doesn't mean just, you know, organized groups that exist out there, but individual community members. And Janelle, you know, is not the only individual community member in our BIPOC community that I have regular contact with. And I think it's important. I think that goes towards that whole, she talked about it earlier, you know, being honest and transparent, building the trust. I mean, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit during this dialogue. It's so critically important that we're able to do that. And I will just add that even though COVID has impacted our ability to interact personally, you know, face to face, that we do maintain, you know, interaction and beyond the incident that kind of brought us together in terms of our interaction, there have been opportunities that I've had to have some of our officers present at events that Janelle has hosted, to support youth and students, and there have been opportunities that I've had to participate in community forums that Janelle has helped organize to talk about, before even George Floyd, to talk about police community relations and maybe some of the police reform bills and things that, again, predated our most recent legislative session. So Janelle has really initiated a lot of those interactions, but it's always important for me to respond to her and keep that communication open.
So I want to talk a little bit about police reform, because for years and years and years, many people have been talking about the need for police reform, and those voices got very loud in demanding reform after the tragedy of George Floyd's death. And I'm just wondering, Chief Dan, what are some police reforms that you could back, that you would support?
Well, I think that what's really important is that, when we talk about police reform, that we really all understand what that means, right? And because I think to different community members, it may mean something entirely different. I'll start by saying that I am a huge proponent of, de-escalation training, and we implemented de-escalation training here at the Everett Police Department back in 2016, 2017, where here in Washington State, the state requires only 8 hours of crisis intervention team training for all commissioned law enforcement officers. And I mandated that all of our officers receive 40 hours of crisis intervention and de-escalation training, including myself, from the chief on down to our newest officers. Now, COVID has interfered with this a little bit. We're trying to get back on track to get, some of our newer officers through that 40-hour block, but it's a commitment that I've made. And so, any goals that strive towards, reducing, violent interactions between law enforcement community members, I support that, right? But, in terms of other reform, I'll say in general, I think some departments in this country have been reforming for years, and I think other departments haven't, right? And so I always get concerned, with this kind of one size fits all approach, because I think that police departments, some of them are at different stages than other departments, right? And so, when I look at what we've tried to do here since I took over as chief, and introducing implicit bias training to our staff starting in 2016, and every couple of years after that, procedural justice training for our staff, trauma-informed interviewing for our police officers, some of these areas that traditional law enforcement organizations don't necessarily train their officers on. I think it's critically important that our officers are culturally competent and understand these issues and are aware of these issues, are aware of things like adverse childhood experiences and how that may impact the individuals that we're encountering on the streets. So that's important to me. In terms of just general reform, I know that there's a lot out there. From state to state, it varies. I think that, increasing some of the training mandates as it relates to de-escalation training. I think, national databases that allow for departments to see what, let's say, a lateral or an experienced police officer in another part of the country, what their history is, it would be helpful, in terms of officers that are moving from organization to organization. National use of force database. The Everett Police Department, when the FBI launched the pilot program, we were one of the first departments in the state of Washington to report, and we still report into the FBI's national use of force database, even though we already now have a new state law that requires we report our use of force to the state. We're dual reporting, because I just think it's important for transparency purposes that information is out there. So I'll stop there, because I could probably talk just on this for quite a long time.
Well, it's just wonderful. It's like your police department is really taking the lead and making some really important changes in how you do with your community. So that's wonderful to hear. And Janelle, I'm just curious, in hearing Chief Dan talk about reform, what that means to him and what the Everett Police Department has done. What do you think about reform? What do you want to see? What do people in your community say when they're talking to you? You're talking about what needs to change. What is the feeling about that when it comes to reforming the police department?
Well, for me, growing up, I never had a problem with policing. Our neighborhoods, we had community police who literally, the police came and they sat on the porch with us. They had the ability to spend time with us, get to know us. So they truly got to know the people they policed, or they, watched out for, and they were responsible for, in a sense. And one thing I do know that up here, it's like we have I get like the 911 call, like end of the week thing of all the calls, and it's an overabundance of calls and not enough police. And so the main issue is that the one thing I would love to see, and I won't really say police reform, because a lot of, unfortunately, the Black community and and other people of color, they want to see more funds go to things that, in my opinion, will take away from the ability for the police department to operate. And they want to defund the police. They don't want police reform. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of those people that know we need our police. We need to support our police because we can't do the job, and the job is an unthinkable job. So despite everything we've been through with police, I do have police in my family, and I do have friends of the police officers. So I understand what they go through. I understand what we go through. And I think when you talk about reform can take away a key point in what they do, and it can make it worse for us because it just takes away the time and effort they could be putting into getting in our community. If they're going through all this extra training, all these extra mandates that's put through by legislation, you're taking away more time that they have to, get to know the community and be a part of the community. You're just turning them like a Gestapo and making them like police instead of saying, let's reform the community as a whole, and focus on the community. So for me, it's just like, I would love to see us be able to just unite and actually get to know each other. And that for me, doesn't take legislation. That just takes us to put in the time and effort and energy and be creative about how we do it. It's just creativity around getting to know each other. Because, time is limited. Time is, it is what it is for the police department. And we do have a high turnover rate in Everett. So we really need to, we really need that. Mm-hmm. We just need us to be together and unite, because we have silos, we have the defund, the reform, but we don't have anybody saying unite.
Yeah.
And that's what we need, is to unite.
I get it from you that you're really about the community coming together, kind of like what you and Chief Dan are doing, and talking, getting to know each other, kind of the Braver Angels model,
right?
that we hold out. But I'm just curious, Janelle, in reality, the folks in Everett, especially the people of color who live there, do you feel like they are ready to trust the police to even have those conversations? Because you've got to have some sense of trust there, even before you can kind of be willing to sit down and talk to someone. Is that there?
It's not. It was there before the George Floyd situation. A lot of people were a lot more open-minded. Mm-hmm. But then I think fear came into play with everybody, and repressed anger came out. And it became, I don't want to talk to the police. I don't want to talk to white people. I don't want to. So then it's like we went backwards. Hmm. We went backwards, and, then we kind of hopped on the gravy train. We hopped on that train and said, I'm going to follow the lead. I'm not going to talk to the police. I don't want to see police. Police need to go. And it was just like, but you were the same ones 2 years ago working with the police, So we saw like a big shift of literally one moment we were trying, and then the next moment it's like, police in another state killed somebody, so I'm not going to deal with our police here. Mm-hmm. And I'll be the first one to admit, when my children had issues with the police, that literally our police department is not like the police department you see when it comes to the violence towards the citizens. You have a cop every now and again that has been explained to me that has had a bad day. And I just remind those officers that I'm a mama and I have bad days too. But you can't I went into this relationship with the police department, not trusting, but I wanted answers. So sometimes, we lead with fear. So if we go into a situation and we're fearful anyway, then we should take that moment when we don't feel like, when we don't trust, to put our faith into that situation and literally go into it. Because we can go into it guarded, but just go into it, because you never know what's going to come out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how you were saying that before the tragedy of George Floyd, you felt like there was a greater sense of the community being willing to work with the police and vice versa, but that after that tragedy, that there was this distance or attention that kind of swelled up after that. I would love to just ask Chief Dan if you have noticed like more tension between the police department and people of color in Everett, Washington after George Floyd. You think things have been set backwards in your relationship with your community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know the full answer, but what I can say is this, is that, post the George Floyd tragedy, I had the opportunity to engage with the community, maybe not person face to face, but in a lot of, town halls or small group forums like this, to have conversations with members of our communities of color here in the Everett area. And, I spent time walking through, a lot of what we do here in Everett and how we do it and why we do it. And I feel as though, as when we walked away from those conversations, similar to how Janelle described our interaction when we walked away, that there was a mutual understanding, right? I learned a tremendous amount from our communities of color after the George Floyd murder, and learning from them about perspectives, their history, why they may distrust police, and acknowledging that, starting that is my foundation, and accepting that. And then the community members doing the same, right? I mean, I have all this stuff on that I wear, but when I'm not working, right, I look like everybody else here. I'm a father, I'm a parent, I'm a husband. Janelle has said something to me before that sticks with me, about we just have to humanize each other, right? And so even in the midst of tragedy and in the midst of tension, if we can all still sit down and talk, and talk in a respectful way, right, where both sides are listening and really hearing what the other person is saying. And this is what I did with Janelle, and I think she did the same thing with me. We both were very, maybe dug in on whatever our perspectives may have been, but we both were listening to what each other was saying. And so just automatically when you do that, I think there's a certain level of respect and trust that starts to build. So while there may have been some members of our community that may have taken a step or two back after the George Floyd incident, I also think that there are members in our community that took that opportunity to take a step or two forward and say, I want to know more about what our local police department is doing. And I want to hear it from the chief, or I want to hear it from, somebody within the organization. And so I definitely think that was beneficial.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I want to go back to talking a little bit about the trust and, building that trust. And I want to go to you, Janelle, and I want to ask, at what point did it come to you and you felt like, I can trust this person, he's being authentic, he's real, we can continue these dialogues because I feel like he gets me and he sees me. At what point throughout your dialoguing did you realize that this is working, this feels good, this feels healing?
It was actually at the Initiative 940 campaign forum that I did with Chief and some community members of the panel. And Initiative 940 was one where they were trying to put in police accountability laws. And I was not for everything they wanted to do under the initiative, but I was for, I felt change needed to be made. But if we didn't get the conversation started on what that looked like, then it would be a fail because everybody would not at least have their voices heard, right? So we did this forum, and me and him, me and Chief, we talked about everything from how do I come dressed to all these things. And the one thing I told him was like, you know, I'm afraid of guns. I don't like the police uniform. The uniform is what scares me, not the police. It's the uniform. And Chief doesn't know this to this day. I saw him in Costco one day and he was in regular everyday people clothes. Mm. So that if I had to meet with him in person or see him in person, I saw him as the person I saw in Costco, not the chief in the uniform. Mm-hmm. So when he came to the forum, that's the chief that I saw, and he was true to his word. And the fact that he trusted me and he came to the forum because I told him I have it under control. If it gets out of control, I'll get it back. But we're not going to have a situation where you're put in a, you know, spot of being unsafe, harmed, or even disrespected, because this forum was about him coming out, speaking with us as community members and answering our questions in regards to the police reform at that time that was being put in place. And he kept his promise and he came out. And I was able to keep my promise and keep things, you know, we had one guy who wanted to rant and rave a little bit, but, you know, we got it back and we kept it respectable. So in that moment, it was like, we talked, but in that moment, we knew at that point that it was like, I trusted him because he kept his word with me, you know? So it was like, there was that moment that really encapsulated our relationship.
And I would just, thank you, Janelle. I would just, you know, ask you the same question, Chief Dan. At what point in your dialoguing relationship with Janelle did you come away feeling like this is a person that I can trust and I want to continue building this relationship with her?
Well, I think that for me, you know, it's always a process, right? As you get to know people. And one of the things that really struck me early on with Janelle, right, is how fiercely supportive, right, she is of her family, right, and I am too, right, and protective of your kids, and through everything, you know, through the passion of the whole experience that occurred, that's what I saw, right, was that really in the end, as upset as she was, it was really not because she hated the police, not because she didn't like me, not because she even disliked the officers that were there, but because she was representing, you know, her daughter, which I think any of us, you know, would do that, have kids and understand that. So for me, you know, that's where it starts. And then, you know, as we go through time and events like the forum that she talked about, the community forum, I'm the first one, you know, I'll take a tough question, right? And I'll have people that'll yell and scream and be really upset and disrespectful to me. And I'm going to maintain my same level of respect, you know, but she did, you know, she wanted to have a productive conversation with the community, right? And we know that, you know, that if things go off the rails, sometimes you lose that ability to be productive. So that forum she talked about, you know, was a good opportunity for both of us to kind of to see each other in action and holding others accountable. And so but it's been a process for me, and you know, and Janelle to this day, you know, somebody that, you know, if she calls me or emails me, you know, she'll hear back from me, right? And I'll do whatever I can to help her out and her family.
That's wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of this interviewing part of our evening, but I want to just ask you both. Well, first, I do want to go to Janelle's daughter, because I really want to make sure that, you know, she's now 18 years old now. And, you know, I'm just wondering how she's doing and how this incident that happened with the police department, how that's changed her. I know it's changed you as the mother, but how has it changed your daughter as well?
And I was hoping that she would be on her break by now, but she has not texted me or anything. But she, you know, she actually is kind of weird, because the cops, every time she had an incident, they would laugh and say, you know, she actually helped de-escalate the situation. So she was always the kid in trouble, but she always had the cops by the end of the situation kind of lighthearted and and I think she came into herself a little bit, and she started being more respectful and responsible. And she just, you know, her thing was, I'm going to always come off aggressive. I'm going to always come off whatever. I can't change me. She said, but if I can talk to police and I can talk to people and I can open up with them and once again, humanize them in that moment, that it'll come out in better terms. And no matter what happened with her, she still always she could be in handcuffs and be cracking jokes and having the cops laughing. Like, she's just that kid. She has a personality about her, but it came about in dealing with police because she had to find a different way of doing it. So now, you know, she's in college, you know, she got her GED, she's in college now, she's working,
Right.
you know, and she's a happy kid, you know, and she has, you know, she loves Officer Fletcher with our, you know, police department. And, you know, she just like, that was her school SRO, you know, so she has, you know, she loves the police department up here. And she, like me, it's probably 5 officers that she can say, I love these officers like family.
Wow.
But, you know, so the rest of them, we're trying to get to know them, and we're kind of cautious and kind of walking on eggshells still a little bit. But as we, you know, and because of her, literally, she has instilled a thing in me, and it's all because of her personality, that I always try to humanize people. And it's because of her. Because I saw that at one point she wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was looked at as, you know, what, just a stereotype, just a template. And so I try not to do that with police and everybody else because of her. So she's a great influence as a kid, right? She's only 17. She'll be 18 in November. So she's a great influence. And she tried to see everybody when she came up the police department, but she was only up here for a week. So, but she said she'll be back in November. So they need to, you know, be ready to give her birthday presents.
That's great. So my very last question, because we are running out of time, I just want to ask you both, what is the one thing that you have learned about yourself throughout this community dialoguing that you guys have both engaged in? Chief Dan, what have you learned about yourself throughout this process?
Well, I think for me, what I've learned is how important it is for me in the position I'm in to understand how, you know, interactions with officers from this department can impact our community, right? Even the most minor interactions to more serious interactions, and that those all matter, in the importance of listening, right, to your community, and listening to individual members of your community, and again, I guess not just listening to them, but hearing what they're saying, and how important that is, right? And understanding other people's perspectives, because sometimes I think it's easy for all of us to get caught up in our own perspectives, right? And this is the way we do things because this is the way we've always done it. And I think that it's just important, and it reinforced, you know, my experience with Janelle. It's just reinforced the importance of hearing and listening and understanding and being open.
Yeah, wonderful. And Janelle, what have you learned about yourself throughout this process, or that you're dialoguing with Chief Dan?
You know, like I said, I went in being that mom. So I've actually, my relationship with him has humbled me a little bit. It's actually humbled me because I was, like I said, I'm fierce, and I'm a force to be reckoned with when I'm not happy. And, you know, the more I worked with him and talked with him, the more I felt like my community work with the youth is. And so I do a lot of work with youth, and I'm like, okay, I see this police situation with kids, and I look at it. And for me, you know, I sit here and I look at the chief, you know, or my relationship with him, and how it really emboldened me to really say, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm going to continue to speak up for these kids, but I need to teach these kids also how to speak up in a respectful manner, how not to make themselves a target, and be unapologetic about the fact that I'm helping kids, and I'm helping these kids the way I was raised. So I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I'm not afraid to go into conversations with these kids anymore. And it feels like, you know, in my community, it just makes me feel like more of, I may be afraid, but I'm going to walk in fear, keep praying on it, and make sure that when I do it, I'm choosing faith over fear. So I can be scared all day long, but I'm going to do it because these kids mean something more to me, more than what I thought originally. And it's not just about my daughter, but she just opened up that reality that this is an issue, and this is what I need to be doing. Whether it's what I want to be doing or not is a different story, but it's what I need to be doing, and I can't get away from it. So this is what my work is.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, Chief Dan. It has been my honor to talk with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So we're going to now go into the Q&A session. I'm going to hand over to David. He's going to talk to you a little bit about how that's gonna go. David?
Sure. Yeah, so this part, we'll have plenty of time for this. This is Q&A and discussion. So anyone may ask a question of our speakers, just raise your Zoom hand. And anyone with direct experience of the issues that we're describing is welcome to chime in and comment. If you do have a comment, just keep it to 3 minutes or less. And when we'll call on you, and when we call on you, if you could just indicate at the very beginning if it's a question or if it's a comment. And so Angie will be moderating this part as well. But Angie, I'm just going to tell you that I know that Lynn McCoy is our first person with a question. So I'll turn it over to you, Angie, and you can call on her.
Hi, Lynn, you're on.
Hey there, thanks. Okay, this was very interesting, but I would like to have heard more about how the incident was resolved. I had some specific concerns about how, for instance, one officer gave her one order and the other gave her another, and she did what she needed to do at the time because of, she ended up on the ground. And I don't know how many officers had her down on the ground. That was unclear. And so I would like to know how that was resolved, and that was never discussed. And also, you asked how Janelle's daughter was doing, how she had changed. I want to know how the police officers changed. I'd really like to know more specifics.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Chief Dan, can you talk about what happened? I think I did ask earlier, was there any kind of disciplinary action that came about from what the police officers did? But can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into all the details because obviously there were more people than just Janelle's daughter involved in this incident. So, a big portion of what we're going to do in any situation like this, right, is review all the witness statements. And one of the areas that Janelle and I, and it really didn't come out during our discussion here today, is that there have been times where we have sat down and met and agreed to disagree, right? And so, the police reports and the witness statements may reflect a certain series and sequence of events that occurred. And then, and that may not be necessarily the perspective of everybody there. So what I have to do as police chief, and what we do in this process, and I specifically don't recall all the details. This was 4 years ago of this particular incident, but I do know that we did review it. I don't believe there was any discipline administered to the officers. I believe that the use of force was determined to be appropriate and within policy for the circumstances that the officers were dealing with at the particular moment. But again, it does not mean that if an officer, the officer's actions are within law and within policy, that we still can't review that, and we still can't do better, right? Or still can't look at other ways. Could we have handled that in a different way? Could we have employed other de-escalation techniques that maybe weren't employed at the time? As it relates to issues like conflicting commands and orders, this is something that we do train on now. And part of it is just because it's a progression of the profession, where we have realized that we have to make sure that if we've got multiple officers on a scene that are giving conflicting orders, that's obviously a problem. And we even have legislation that was recently passed here in the state of Washington in this last session that under new statewide use of force standards, that actually spells out that departments and officers should consider identifying one particular officer. And this is what we're training on now, one particular officer that gives orders and commands versus multiple officers. So that's where we're at today.
Okay. Lynn, did you feel like you got your question answered? I appreciate the question.
In a way, I wasn't all that interested. Thank you so much for asking, Angie. I wasn't so much interested in disciplinary action as what the officers, and thank you for answering, Chief, thank you for answering the question about the conflicting messages, conflicting instructions. I was interested in what did they learn? Has anybody ever asked them, what did they learn from this incident, or any officers of what they learned from incidents like this, where there have been, let's call it misunderstandings?
When our officers, and sometimes it is not even a use of force, right? It's demeanor. It's how they interact with a community member during any specific call. Right now, we survey all of our 911 callers post incident. Every one of them receives a survey in which they can rate and score their interaction with law enforcement. And we do then take the opportunity, all of our supervisors, to review those and sit down with the officers and talk to them about those interactions. So I don't know in this particular case, to the person asking the question, exactly what these officers learned, but I can tell you that we do take the opportunities as supervisors and as mentors to sit with our officers and to talk out these incidents and to walk them through different alternatives that they could have employed in different situations. And again, everyone's different. And it does allow that officer, and it's an engaging process, right? It's not just one person telling another person, but it's an interactive process in which their supervisors will sit down and have a discussion with our officers and talk about, oh, I could have done something different. Sometimes you can't. I'll be honest with you. There are some times that in the job that we do and in the interactions that we have, and as rapidly evolving as those situations are, as unpredictable as they are, that the actions that the officer took at that particular moment was the only viable option at that moment. We try to debrief those and talk about them. But I can't answer the question of what did these specific officers learn. I know that there was discussion. I know that there was coaching, and discussion with their supervisors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So it looks like the next person on my panelist list is Bob Lowe. Can you unmute yourself, Bob?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi.
I have a pair of questions actually for both Janelle and Dan. The first question, and you'll see how they're linked. The first question is, do you think that Janelle's daughter would have been treated differently if she were white? And the second question is, if perchance the two of you disagree about that, how do you have a conversation about that disagreement?
Good question, Bob. Chief Dan, you want to take that on?
Well, yeah.
Race had a factor in how Janelle's daughter was treated?
Yeah, I can certainly address that from my perspective. And the answer to that is no. The answer to that is that in this particular case, I believe that the officers engaged, and after reading the reports and reading the witness statements, engaged in the manner in which they did. They would have engaged that way regardless of the race of Janelle's daughter. So I then would defer certainly to Janelle as to her perspective on that.
Yeah, I would love to hear from Janelle to Bob's question.
Yeah, in this particular situation, I don't see race playing a big part in it. And I did question that in the beginning because she was the only, actual Black child at the scene. But she is very fair complected. So the officers, it was dark too. So the officers, I would hope that wasn't the thing, but I don't think she would have been treated any differently, because I've also seen some of these other officers in action with other children. So I don't think it was a big factor, or would have been a factor.
Okay. So now I think I have Taylor Johnson. Taylor, you want to unmute yourself, and do you have a question or a comment?
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Also, I want to thank the main people talking. I feel like this is very insightful. My question is to both of you guys. With the police reform coming down the pipeline, do you feel like there are components in the reform that can help the community or hinder the community more?
Interesting.
Well, that is a great question. And I guess what I will say, just in the interest of time and brevity, is that the answer to your question, I think, is both. when I look at in Washington State now, we're just speaking about Washington State, that passed what I would consider probably some of the most progressive police reform bills in the country in this last session. Do I believe that as a result of those bills, that suite of bills that was passed, that there are going to be less uses of force or fewer uses of force with officers involving community members? The answer is yes. And that's a good thing, obviously. Now, you also have to look, though, at the other byproduct of that, right? That if it's because officers are not engaging with people that are committing crimes and that are preying on other people and victimizing other people in our community, because there's either confusion over the application of these laws, this suite of laws, or conflicting opinions, or in our case here, in Washington, where you've got legal advisors advising police departments that all have different perspectives on what these laws mean, could that outcome ultimately hinder community safety? And I think the answer to that is yes.
And Janelle, what do you think in regards to Taylor's question?
I actually agree that a lot of the laws, they have been the most progressive. And with me being a Republican, I really wholeheartedly believe, I see the good that was intended, but it just wasn't there. Like I said, it's needed, but the way ours was just written was very irresponsible. And it has caused a lot of, I don't know, I won't say purposeful, hindrance, but it has hindered the police in doing their jobs. But it also has enabled some of the police to not do their jobs. I just had a friend literally yesterday hit by a car. A guy accelerated towards her during a visitation of a child, ramped up his car, ran towards her, and hit her with his car in the police department. Not every police department, because I'm sure they would have put him in jail. But this other police department said there was nothing they could do about it because it was a misdemeanor. It was just reckless endangerment. Crazy. So they didn't do it because it was a misdemeanor. So because of our new laws in Washington State, they did not arrest. They wrote a report, but they didn't arrest. And she ended up in the hospital last night because she has a bleeding disorder. Craziness. So the person could have killed her. So, so unless she dies, nothing's going to happen. So, they need to really look at these laws, and I don't want a special session. I don't think anything should be happening outside of, they need to look at this now, not next year, not the end of the year. There is a hindrance in them doing their job, and there's a special line of those who refuse to do their jobs to prove a point. So it has caused a lot of bad apples to become rotten, and it makes it bad for the rest of the cops who are genuinely trying to do their jobs.
And I think that's interesting too, especially when Dan was talking about basically every area varies, and you guys are specifically talking about your area, and it does vary. So I think it just said it right there. The issue of it's trying to help, but it looks like it's hindering the good officers from doing their job. But thank you, guys.
Thank you, Taylor. So now I have next up is Mimi.
Hi.
Hi, Mimi.
Thank you. I'm sort of sensing and aware that the distinctiveness of who Janelle is and who Chief Dan is really important. They're extraordinary community leaders and kind of who they are as human beings. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of insights that would be useful for other communities around anything that looks like civic or municipal infrastructure that supports these kinds of leadership relationships. Is there anything in your community that is an enhancer to that? Considering that who you are as people is pretty important. Is there anything about the civic or municipal infrastructure that supports that relationship, which I think seems to be really critical in what we're learning?
So yeah, Chief Dan, do you want to start with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I really wish that there was some sort of infrastructure or system, that was in place throughout, not only just even in our own county, right? You see different personalities not only community members, but in your chiefs of police, right? And that varies throughout the entire country. And so I think that probably the most critical, right, are the people. And I think you, Mimi, you touched on that, right? It's the way I look at policing. It's the way I look at community. It's the way Janelle looks at policing and the way she looks at the community. And that, you know, in this particular case, it meshed, even though we will both be the first ones to say that we don't always agree on everything. You know, in terms of, you know, that infrastructure, you know, I've thought a lot about it, because especially when you heard me speaking earlier about this issue of the one size fits all approach when it comes to policing reform, and how I don't know that that's the most effective way to address some of the inequities that exist within the criminal justice system. But the same holds true, right, with this, I call us maybe the CEOs of our police departments and our organizations, that there is no, you know, consistent, you know, program or training or systems or infrastructure in place that helps all communities build relationships the way, you know, Janelle and I have. But it's something that we should strive for. I just don't have the answer to that.
You guys are a model. You guys need to go to every, you know, every entity, every institution in Everett and bring this to those, you know, those organizations. Janelle, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I actually agree with him wholeheartedly, because a lot of people that do see me in action, they're like, you know, how are you talking with the police? And the first question is, you're a Black woman. Why are you even talking to the police, right? It's always the elephant in the room, because we're not supposed to talk to the police. And I think a lot of us do it, but our communities don't know we're doing it. And for me, it's like, no, the person that I am, I really feel like the community should really, like I said, whether you like the police or don't like the police, it's not about you liking it. It's like you have to cohabitate. So, you know, we have to take up this space together. We have to share it. You don't get a corner here and they get a corner there. So it's really important that the conversations happen with our police department. So I really do, like, I agree with, you know, Chief wholeheartedly in what he said.
If Angie too, if I could just make one more comment on that, and that is, you know, I was thinking as we were discussing this forum and getting ready for it, you know, what could other communities learn from the experience that Janelle and I have had? And again, I'm not going to say that this is possible in every community, because it just, quite frankly, the reality is it's not, whether it's because the community doesn't trust the police or vice versa, or a combination of both. But I think that it's important that if you're in a community and you want to engage your police department, that, and you've heard Janelle talk about it, right? That even though you might be fearful of it, you might be intimidated by it, that take the chance, right, to reach out. If she never took the opportunity to reach out to me and engage in that first discussion, we wouldn't be here today having this discussion, and we wouldn't have built the relationship that we've built over the years. So, but you have to do it, you know, in a strategic way, right? You have to be, even if you're emotional and you're upset and you're passionate, you still have to be respectful. And I think that if you're respectful, it's going to give you the best opportunity to really engage your local police department in a way that can really benefit the entire community.
Yeah. So next, thank you for that, Chief Dan. I want to call on Michael DeCourt. I think he's the next one up. Hi, Michael. You have a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. Thank you. First, I just want to say I greatly appreciate events like this. My question piggybacks on Janelle's response on reform versus total defunding. And my question is for her. As a white male who believes there is clearly systemic racism, it seems to me that all too often the Black community squanders the power it gains through needless tragedy, especially regarding the murder of George Floyd. Examples being, again, the total defund effort, or the Black Lives Matter lead in Chicago stating that looting was reparations. How does this help the Black community's efforts? It seems to me that many leaders in the Black community underserve that community. Examples of good leadership, I believe, are the grace of the Floyd family calling for peaceful demonstrations after the killing of George Floyd, and Killer Mike and Keisha Lance Bottoms handling of events in Atlanta. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Janelle?
Well, he basically spoke to my heart when he just said that, because our leaders are underserving the Black community. These leaders, and one thing, like one of the questions you had for us was like, what could you do? Yeah. It's like, what could you do? Like, what can we do better? And I was thinking, and I think I talked to you, Angie, about that question when I was kind of laughing about it. It's like, I was thinking, okay, we need to have true community representative leaders, because, we have the NAACPs and all these different civil rights organizations that are supposed to represent us and represent our thought as if Black folks are a monolith, right? And unfortunately, it's not true. We're not. And I'm like, and I start laughing at what you had asked, Angie, and thinking to myself, okay, I see the NAACPs, I see the leaders that are part of these organizations that speak for us, but they're not speaking against the violence. And they're actually saying it's okay because we all feel the rage. We want to feel, we want to see things, we want to see and feel the burn, but not of our own communities. We don't want to see the community get torn down, mom and pop shops getting burnt down, because it really sets us back of all those things that the Black community built up. So I sit back and I look at it and I was thinking to myself, if we want to do things the right way, we need to tell these leaders to take a step back and let the moms and the dads start to actually have a conversation. Let us start talking, and for people to sit back and let the queens take place. Let the moms step up. We have the weight of the world on our shoulders. I'm gonna kill you, girl. We have the weight of the world on our shoulders. So if we have to actually carry the weight, then let us speak for a change. For these big people, Al Sharpton, all these different, take a step back and just stop it, because it's not helping our community. None of this helping our community. And it's not. And I don't believe in the institution of Black Lives Matter. I don't believe in a lot of these things because it hurts us. It does not help us at all. And like with police reform, it hinders the Black community's growth because we're in a victim mindset and we have hissy fits when we don't get our way. So if we don't come with a productive way to do things, then our leaders should not even be speaking. They're speaking at a term and they're causing us harm.
Yeah, and you do know, Janelle, that a lot of people in the community would not agree with that, of course.
Oh,
I wanted to, yeah. So I just want to go. I do want to get everyone's voices in here, but I wanted to just ask you a little bit to kind of dive in a little bit about what you think is going to be beneficial to moving the Black community forward. So you're saying, like, you don't adhere to the Black Lives Matter, you don't have much respect for Al Sharpton or NAACP. What are the institutions, what are the groups, what are the communities that are helping people of color through some of the challenges, so many of them that we're experiencing now today?
Well, personally, here in Washington, we don't have those organizations and those organizations that try to step up, because we're trying to work with and bridge the gap. Bill, we're trying to bridge the gap and bring a working relationship once again with police and community. We have organizations here in Washington State actively pushing against that. So, and some of those organizations, unfortunately, are made up of those same group leaders that I'm speaking of. So it's like, they're in the groups that are supposed to lead in our advancement, but at the same time, they put forth a message to the community in secret that actually stops the advancement of what's good for us. So we need more leadership to stand up against what we know is harming us. And like I said, I only speak from a place of Washington State, because in Missouri, our NAACP in Missouri is on it. And they tell them, don't do this. We're not looting, we're not burning, we're not doing these things. But then we have organizational leaders up here that's like, oh yeah, let the youth take charge and let them do what they're doing. But the youth don't understand how far we've come to get where we're at. And we don't want to roll backwards. We want to keep advancing and moving forward. So they don't understand what it is I see 13-year-old, 14-year-olds in Seattle burning stuff down and setting things on fire, throwing firecrackers at lines of police during live events. And how does that help us? It doesn't help anything. It just causes more divisiveness, because those cops on the front line, they see it and they're upset, but then we have community leaders saying they justify it. They're okay with it. So it's like, you can't have a leader justifying violence and justifying tearing up communities to get a point across. Because look at what happened with segregation. It was forced. And we as Blacks have never been accepted. We have not been accepted. In reality, we have legislation that states they have to accept us, but we don't have true acceptance as Blacks in America. There was forced acceptance, forced through legislation. That was not human nature, and you can't change human nature. So it's up for us in the Black community to start picking and choosing our own leaders and not being dictated to what organization is responsible for our leadership.
Okay, thank you, Janelle.
Angie,
I wanna, I have a
Angie,
few more
could I just make
people.
one comment on that,
Yes,
just really
that
quick?
you
And I
can.
just,
Yes.
yeah,
please
I
go
just
on.
wanted to just say that, and you heard me mention it earlier in my piece during your moderated question and answer session, that it's important to me as police chief, right, that I am able to interact and build relationships with all of our institutions and community members as well. So Janelle and some of the other individual members of our community that want to reach out and have that conversation, that I'm able to do that, but also those that represent the institutions that we have in our community. And it's important that I, as the police chief, maintain all those relationships, right? Because it's a matter for me, and I know this is kind of fraying off of the question itself, but it's important that we build and work on building that trust with our entire community, regardless of what institution or what community or neighborhood you represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Dan. So now up I have Rebecca Fester. Rebecca there, you want to unmute yourself? State your question, comment.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. How are you doing? Thank you for taking my question. And I want to thank both Chief Dan and Janelle for their wonderful comments. For full disclosure, I'll tell you that I was a consultant with the Community Policing Consortium, which is funded by the Department of Justice. And I was on the road for 5 years between 2008 and 2013 doing community engagements in 68 communities. So I went to 68 police departments, 68 locations. And these issues have been going on for a really long time in the United States of America. And one of the things that we would do when we would go into communities, and we were usually called in, we had to be invited by the police chief, we were usually called in when there was a problem. Every once in a while, there was a very forward-thinking police chief, because leadership is so important, that would have us come in to do a community engagement because they just wanted to increase the goodwill between the law enforcement and their community. But one of the things we'd always say to police departments when we arrived, we would say, listen, the priorities of your community are your priorities. And sometimes in police departments, it's an us against them. And then in the same conversation where we'd have with the community, we'd say, listen, there's not enough police officers to take care of all the issues that you have. And that communities have to take responsibility for what's happening in their neighborhoods and get organized around that. And so one of the other issues that would often come up in all these different, I was from Anchorage, Alaska to Springfield, Massachusetts. It's all over the country. One of the issues would often come up is recruiting. And who were the police officers? Did the police department reflect the demographics of the community in which it served? What kind of people were being recruited to be police officers? And because sometimes we get lazy in the recruitment of police officers. And one of the things I've noticed, and this is years of working in law enforcement, is that police officers are often very frustrated. And they're frustrated because they were sold a bill of goods as to what their job would really be. They were told that it was going to be exciting every day and it was going to be terrific and wonderful. And it ends up being a much more difficult job, a much more boring job, a much more social work kind of job than they ever anticipated. And some of them are very unhappy with that. And so, we have to kind of deal with that and make sure that our police officers are really prepared for what their job is going to be.
Yeah. And so Rebecca, I want to just jump because we're almost at the end of this.
Sorry. Anyway,
you made some really good points. And one thing I wanted to pick up on was the recruitment. I wanted to ask Chief Dan, how diverse is the Everett Police Department up there?
Not as diverse as it should be in what we want it to be, right? So to Rebecca's point, right, our goal is to have a police department that's reflective of our community, right? But one thing that's really interesting, we looked at some of these demographics, right? Right now, our Everett Police Department is about 17% BIPOC officers, right? Not as high as our community, but 17%. But if you look at the average tenure of a police officer in Everett, it's 22 years. So in order for me to make that change, it's like turning a big barge, right? It's going to take time. And so I can tell you this, that just this year out of our, 50% of our hires this year have been BIPOC. 40% of our officers this year have been female officers. We've just brought on a recruiting officer, right? So we're really focused in on recruiting in our communities of color and not selling a bill of goods, right? And really making sure that our officers or prospective applicants understand what it is that they're getting into. But I appreciate the work that you've done, Rebecca. It'd probably be wonderful for me to be able to listen to some of your stories at some point, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. So next on my list here, I have Sandy Hepley. Is Sandy there? If you are, can you unmute yourself and state your question or your comment?
Yes, I'm here. Had trouble unmuting.
Okay.
I am a fairly elderly white female in a relatively well-to-do community in the South. Now I'm in Dallas, Texas, and I have had unpleasant experiences with police officers. So I can only imagine how much more it must be for people of color. They're supposed to like me, and they don't always even treat me with respect. And I think a lot of times don't think they're supposed to like people who don't look like them. I think Chief Dan, you're amazing. And I wish every police chief had the forward-looking attitudes that you have expressed tonight. I hear Janelle's comment about not liking the Black Lives Matter movement and all of those things. What do we do to convince police departments that they really do need to change, that they can't operate under the assumption that a person, just because they're of a different color, must be dangerous and have to be assumed to be dangerous and dealt with that way? I think all the training that Chief Dan, your folks went through would be very helpful, but I don't see all police departments in the country doing that. So what do we do, and how do we start making those changes?
Yeah, that's a big question, important question, and we're going to have to continue to have this conversation. So we can have all the answers in, an hour. Thank you so much for that, Sandy. We're going to actually end this portion of our evening, our Q&A, and I'm going to actually thank you all for your comments and your questions. It's been wonderful to hear all of your voices. I really appreciate all of you guys who have been willing to put yourself out there and ask a question or make a comment. I'm going to pass over to David, who's going to start ending us up to say goodbye. He got a few more things on the agenda, though. Go take it away, David.
Yes,
David,
this has been
David.
really rich to listen to this.
David,
I want to, yes, Janelle?
can I make one? I keep hearing people repeat something about this Black Lives Matter thing, and I just want to make a correction and clarify. I don't have an issue with the mantra Black Lives Matter. I would be a fool to believe that Black lives didn't matter with the fact that I have brown skin, okay? What I'm saying is I don't support the institution and I don't support the organization Black Lives Matter because I feel they're a detriment to my community. So the Black Lives Matter, I get behind the mantra, I understand the sentiment of it, but I do not support the organization.
Thank you for the clarifying comment, Janelle. I'm sure that if we had time, we could have a conversation specifically about that for another hour. Maybe that can be a follow-up conversation. I do want to invite you all to Apple. I invite you to put in the feedback form link in the chat. We would really appreciate your feedback to this conversation, to this We the People's Forum. And if you have ideas for other We the People's Forums, we'd love to hear your feedback as well. This We the People's Forum, it's really intended to what we just heard from today. It's everyday Americans with direct experiences of the issues at hand weighing in. And so, there's plenty of places where we get to hear from the people with Harvard PhDs, and that can be helpful and insightful. But we, the People's Forum, we want to hear from, you know, the people in the community on the ground who are experiencing and have direct experience of the issues at hand. So if you have ideas for other forums to weigh into, we'd love to hear from you. And please do. We typically do this once or twice a month, so we welcome you into future forums. So again, that feedback form is in the chat, and please do click on that. I'm going to invite Angie to say just a little bit about the Angels of Color Caucus, and then we're going to close out tonight by inviting you all to say in a sentence or so, what are you taking away from our conversation tonight? So just be thinking about that. What are you taking away with you from our conversation tonight? Be able to weigh in for about a sentence or so on that. But first, Angie, I want to turn it over to you to talk about the Angels of Color Caucus and also Braver Angels membership.
Yes, I would love to. So, so the Angels of Color, we are a new group, pretty new group. And our mission is really to encourage other people of color to join Braver Angels, to participate in our activities, to sponsor activities, to really have the voices of people of color elevated within Braver Angels. And also in us having community with each other, you know, having dialogues amongst ourselves. So like I said, we are a new group. And if people are interested in knowing more about Angels of Color, I'm going to put my email in the chat box, and you can email me. I'd be happy to talk to you more about what we're doing. We have we haven't had regular meetings lately. We're going to try to get that going again, but you can get on the email list so you'll know about upcoming meetings and events. Also, you can go to our Braver Angels website. There's also information about Angels of Color on the website. And Braver Angels, if you don't know, is an incredible organization. As David mentioned earlier, I joined just recently last spring. And I really just, you know, someone asked me, why did you join Braver Angels? And I said, you know, because I really care about this country. And I, like a lot of us out there, really horrified about what we're seeing out there, the polarization in this country, the hatred rhetoric on both sides, the anger. We can't seem to talk to each other. And I felt like this was an organization that's trying to heal that divide and bringing people together. You know, we can disagree, but we don't have to hate each other. We don't have to be enemies. And so I really am so passionate about Braver Angels. And I really encourage all of you who are not members yet to definitely become part of this movement of really changing our country. So that's what I wanted to say about Braver Angels. Thank you.
Yes, and if you're not already, please consider joining us as a member. Go to braverangels.org. You can click the support us button. And also, I know there's a lot of people here from the Seattle area. If you're not already involved, we have a thriving Braver Angels Alliance there. Mary Beth Stibbins, who's here, is one of the leaders there. So please get involved if you're in the area or in a local alliance, wherever you are. You can go into our website and look up to see if there's an alliance in your area. Okay, we're going to open it up to the floor again. The question is, what are you taking away from our conversation tonight? And just in a sentence or so, just raise your hand and just address that question. What are you taking away with you from our conversation tonight? And Taylor, I know you've had your hand up. Do you have something, or do you want to respond to this question, Taylor?
Sure. Actually, I think I was something that was said, but actually, I'm taking away the fact is that it's nice to see that this community is working to try to fix issues between the Black community and the police, and in communities in general, just not Black communities. Also, the fact is interesting to see that everyone was here to listen and try to, you know, get different points of view and see like, hey, you know, this is an issue. What can we do to solve this? And what solutions can be brought down for the future? And also Miss Shanae's daughter, I loved hearing about her daughter, how much she basically was like, let's talk, let's discuss this, seeing that person that young saying, hey, why don't we talk first before we start having hands thrown, or why don't we just discuss this and see different points of view? I find that was very eye-opening. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Taylor. Roger, what are you taking with you from our conversation tonight?
I see a strong analogy with the profession I'm in special education, that In both cases, you have a group of people hired to work in the public sector in the public interest. And there is absolutely a need for laws that control behavior so that it's appropriate. But ultimately, you're not going to have successful education. You're not going to have successful law enforcement unless you're getting people in there who believe in the mission and want to do the right thing. And it's a chicken and egg thing. It's where hopefully we can get on get away from the vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle of greater and greater trust.
Still, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I am taking away an increased appetite for more conversations like this, because it's just been very, very energizing to me to hear people talk, some who don't share the same views, but who are working together, sort of focused on some of the same issues. So it's just raised my appetite for more of this.
Mary, go ahead and unmute yourself. Mary.
Not quick with the cursor. I'm a resident of Minneapolis, and I want to say thank you to Dan for his using the term, not shying away from calling it the murder of George Floyd, because that's what it was. And as a police chief, it was nice to hear you say that. But I am also taking away something Dan said, that it's how important it is to reach out. I'm going to keep that emblazoned on my head here. Thank you.
Marta and then Dee. Marta. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Marta.
Well, I just think that this particular dialogue was really one of a kind. And unfortunately, all police departments do not have leadership the way this one does. And also that Janelle took a risk and decided to follow through with conversation and communication. That is really, really important. However, I think in my situation in Bellevue, Nebraska, Omaha is very close. And there have been some issues where the police has really not followed what, for instance, the police chief in this situation did in terms of reaching out and talking with the population. But what I have found is that the leadership of the organizations, not just Black Lives Matter, but the Civil Liberties Union, the League of Women Voters, all of these organizations that I'm affiliated with in one way or another do concentrate on the communication piece and really do bring people together to hear one another. And I am firm the believer, as Janelle mentioned, that we need to learn to humanize one another and not let skin color or a particular cultural orientation to separate us, because we are all human beings together. I was raised with that idea, that we're all human beings together. We just look differently from one another and we think differently from one another. But the humanization piece is extremely important. And I spent a lot of my professional life teaching cultural competence and learning from one another, which brings me to the—
And Marta, if you could just begin to wrap it up right now. So
I'm going to wrap it up right now. I have a problem with that label BIPOC, because that's lumping a lot of people of color together, and we are individuals as well as part of communities.
Okay, thank you, Marta. I'm just gonna have time for a couple more people, and then I'm gonna close it out with our moderator and our speakers responding to the question. Dee and then Mandisa. Dee.
I'm taking away that what I've learned from Braver Angels, and I've been a member since 2017, I'll cop to that, is true once again, which is when two people are willing to sit down over differences and talk with respect and curiosity, a trust builds that enables them to solve problems together.
Yes.
Mandisa, and then I'll call on you, Angie. Mandisa, what are you taking away from our conversation tonight?
There I am. I'd like to say I've been doing police and accountability work for over 20 years. I like to say I've been doing it longer than it's been a hashtag or a hustle. And I just appreciate the conversation, and what I'm taking away from it is more of I guess more of a multidimensional approach to the work that I do around this issue in my community. And Janelle and I work closely together. And even though I'm friends with her and she has told me about this forum, actually sitting here and watching this happen, completely different experience. And I'm just very proud of you. And I really, really thank you, Chief, for representing, because I think that you can really help the Pacific Northwest get their act together.
Angie, what are you taking away from our conversation?
Yeah, so, I think the thing I'm taking away is the promise, the possibilities of what happens when we have police departments like the one that Dan Templeman runs, where, there's respect and there's a sense of wanting to know the people that you serve, that they're human beings, being willing to hear them and listen to them and not try to put these under a rug or not trying to ignore things, but to really have open, honest conversations with the people in your community. I think that is what we need to have all across this country. We need every department to take the example of the Everett Police Department. So I go away with the sense of promise of what this country can be and what policing could look like in the future. So thank you, all of you.
Chief Dan.
Thanks, David. Well, I think Dee, for me, hit the nail on the head when she talked about respectful conversation. And for me, it's all about being able to, as a police chief, right, meet with our community and be willing to have difficult conversations and be willing to listen to people and be willing to be introspective, right? I mean, and acknowledge that this profession, like any other profession, can improve. And it's okay to acknowledge that and to admit that. At the same time, there has to be a balance. I'll put that in there as well. But that the importance of just communication and how that breeds public trust.
Janelle.
And just to piggyback off what Chief just said, communication can build that trust that we need. And moving forward, what I'm getting out of this is literally, I'm just holding on to the hope that I have based on the work that I've already done. And I'm going to keep using it to fuel my, to push myself ahead and continue the work that I'm doing. And hopefully one of these days we have everybody at least willing to sit down and have the conversation. And Chief is the inspiration now, and so now my Washingtonians can now know it. He's the inspiration behind these chewy conversations that we've been having inside our Western Washington Alliance. So this is the reason why I do it, because it started with him, and if I know if it could work with him, it could work for Braver Angels.
And with that, we will close this evening. It was wonderful sharing this evening with you all. Let's go out there and build a house united, everyone. Good night.